Welcome to On the Ballot with Ballotpedia, where we connect people to politics by providing neutral, nonpartisan, and reliable information on our government, how it works, and where it's headed.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of On the Ballot. I'm your host, Norm Leahy. I'm a senior editor here at Ballotpedia. And, of course, those of you who follow the program know that we have been paying a great deal of attention to the redistricting fights, the mid-decade redistricting fights going on across the country. One of them that appears for the moment to be settled is in the great state of Texas. And joining us to discuss what we can expect coming out of Texas, it's congressional elections. The filing deadline has already passed, is Gabby Birenbaum with the Texas Tribune, the Washington correspondent for that fine news organization. Gabby, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I've been a long-time user of Ballotpedia for all types of things, so
Yes, and
excited to
I
be
should
here.
point out that you are talking to us from the Senate today. You're in one of their relics, otherwise a phone booth, but it's not Doctor Who's phone booth, so you will not be disappearing on us. So,
Allegedly.
allegedly, well, that's important. First, let's lay the groundwork. The Supreme Court recently came down with a decision allowing Texas to go ahead with the maps that it redrew. Can you give us the 30,000-foot view of that ruling?
Yes, so this has been a sort of legal back and forth for a few months. People might recall over the summer, the Texas legislature passed a map that was intended to give Republicans 5 more seats in Texas, redraw lines to make 5 seats more favorable to them. That map was briefly turned over by a federal panel of 3 judges in El Paso in a 2-1 ruling written by actually a Trump-appointed judge, saying that the map, there was evidence that there was racial gerrymandering with this map, that it was unconstitutional, and that while the legal case proceeded, the use of the map needed to be paused for the 2026 cycle. The state appealed it to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court found, no, this was partisan, which you're allowed to do, and we're going to let this map proceed for this cycle, again, while the case makes its way through the longer court process. So we are going to be using this new map that favors Republicans for 2026.
All right, and because of that, you have been reporting on how this is roiling the ranks of the Texas congressional delegation. Tell us what's going on there.
Yeah, absolutely. So you have a situation now, right, where in multiple districts, you had multiple Democratic incumbents drawn into the same districts. So you had some shadow primaries. Right now, it looks like we're going to have an actual primary between members. In those districts, you have a ton of new Republicans, right? I mean, this is going to be a massive opportunity for Republicans in Texas, of which there are many, right, with political careers, to make that jump to Congress. So you have a lot of interest in these seats. There's going to be competitive Republican primaries in the open seats. And you had a lot of members sort of scrambling to figure out where to run. Multiple members of the delegation jumping to run for higher office or to run for local office in Texas. And so it's really scrambled the delegation. It's going to look really different come next year for those 38 House members.
And I understand that the lineup of who's challenging whom for what seat is changing almost every day. Is that correct?
Pretty much, yeah. I think what I woke up thinking yesterday morning had changed by the end of the filing deadline yesterday evening. So as of yesterday morning, Colin Allred, the 2024 Senate candidate, was running for Senate. Mark Vesey was supposed to file in Jasmine Crockett's old district. Crockett was going to run for Senate. And Julie Johnson, who's another North Texas Democrat, was going to run in Congressional District 33, which is in Dallas. By the end of the day, Allred had left the Senate race. He's now running in 33, as is Julie Johnson. So you have, and he's Julie Johnson's predecessor in Congress. So you have sort of rare incumbent versus her predecessor primary there. Crockett did indeed run for Senate, leaving her seat open, theoretically, for Mark Vesey, right, to slot in there. But Mark Vesey, who's been up here for 13 years in Washington, decided no, he's going to run for Tarrant County Judge, which is where Fort Worth is. That's sort of the biggest swing county in Texas. So he's going to run for county judge there, which is sort of county executive, gets to be on the board of county commissioners. And instead, you're going to have an open Democratic primary for the 30th district. So there were 3 Democratic incumbents in North Texas. They had to find a way to shrink themselves to 2. Instead, only one of those incumbents is running again. And now she's in a competitive primary with a former House member. So it got pretty crazy yesterday.
Yeah, so check your scorecards. The race is changing. Now, you mentioned the Republicans, and that many of them seem to be seeing this an opportunity to get into Congress. One name surprised me. Steve Stockman is running for a Texas House seat. Tell me more about what Republicans think about all this.
Yeah, Steve Stockman is going to be running in a seat in the eastern part of Harris County in Congressional District 9. This would be, I think, his third. If he were to win, third time in Congress. He served 2 short terms and ended up going to jail for various ethical violations. There's other there's a state rep running in that district as well, Briscoe Kane, who's going to be a strong candidate, as well as a former Harris County judge, Republican candidate, Alex Mueller. But yeah, in these 5 seats, I would sort of break them into 2 buckets. One is these 2 seats in South Texas, where moderate Democrats, Henry Cuellar and Vicente Gonzalez, have been able to hang on, even though Trump won those seats in 2024. So they drew more Trump voters into those seats. Those are going to be really tough reelection campaigns for Cuellar and Gonzalez, although they've had tough races in the past. And so you have South Texas Republicans, right, competing to take on either of those guys. The other 3, and they vary amongst themselves, but I think are, going to be easier for Republicans to win. One's in Central Texas, one's in North Texas, one's in the Houston area. And you see competitive Republican primaries in all 3 of those because, again, those look like pretty strong opportunities for Republicans to take a seat.
And I think it's important to note, too, that just because lines have been redrawn based upon election returns from 2024 doesn't mean you get the same electorate in 2026. So a lot of this redrawing of maps is based upon a lot of assumptions, isn't it?
Yes, for sure. And I think in South Texas, especially, Republicans are banking on some of the voting shifts with Hispanic voters in the Rio Grande Valley and in South Texas and Laredo and areas like that being more permanent, that even without Trump on the ballot, Hispanic voters will still flock to Republicans. That hasn't necessarily been true in past cycles. And we've already seen, I think, some buyer's remorse with some voters down in the Valley. So those will be really interesting seats. On the other hand, I think I've seen some people say, oh, well, because this was drawn on old data, which it was, including 2024 election data, and 2026 looks like a blue wave might be building. It's a Trump midterm, all these things, that this could be what's called a dummy mander, where actually they drew their lines, they spread their voters too thin, and they could actually end up losing seats. That's not going to happen here, I think, to be clear.
Okay.
Republicans will, right now they have 25 seats. I feel pretty confident saying, even in, I think, sort of the best case scenario for Democrats, and at inside elections, they actually broke this down. And they were like, all right, if Democrats do Hillary Clinton numbers along the border, Joe Biden numbers from 2020 with, in the suburbs, and Beto level turnout that he did in 2018, even in that scenario, Republicans are still almost assuredly going to have more than 25 seats. They're going to gain seats. It's just a question of how many, and can Democrats limit those numbers, and then also maybe make a dent in some of the safer seats, and maybe give Republicans pause about the next time they end up drawing the maps.
But speaking of drawing of maps, it's not just a Texas phenomenon. You know this well. You've reported on it. And we're talking about there's court cases in Missouri over the redistricting there. The Indiana is still maybe not going to go through redistricting there. Florida is still possibly, maybe sort of in play to redraw its map. Can you give us a rough outline of what's still in play on the redrawing map front?
Yes, Texas likes to say what happens here changes the world. And in this case, what started in Texas, I think, has definitely reshaped the 2026 electoral landscape across the country. When President Trump pressured, the Texas legislature to take up redistricting at his behest, and they did, right? And they redrew this map. I think Republicans probably could not have predicted the level of backlash from Democratic blue states, many of which, were thought to be handicapped by these independent redistricting commissions. But I think you saw in California, right, they passed a ballot measure to forego their commission, redraw their map to try to gain 5 new Democratic seats. That already passed, right? I mean, we need a court ruling, but it looks like that's going to happen. Missouri and North Carolina both redrew maps, as you mentioned, to gain 1 seat. Missouri now, right, as you mentioned, we'll see what happens. There's an initiative to take it back with voters. Virginia, right? Virginia is 6-5, currently favoring Democrats. They could redraw to 9-2 or even 10-1. And so I think there's a sense that it looked like at the beginning, okay, even if we kick off a redistricting war for Republicans, the math is on our side. I think that's definitely been scrambled. As you mentioned, in Indiana, it hasn't been, it's been tough sledding for Republicans to try to get that to pass. And so this could all end up, I think, being a wash or even favoring Democrats. We'll have to see. But I don't think this is sort of what the White House intended when they first started this push.
Strange. You roll the pebble down the mountain and you end up with a avalanche, and that
Yes.
seems to be where we are right now. But you mentioned
Yes.
California, and remind me, there's a lawsuit there, correct?
Yes, there is a lawsuit. I do think California Democrats have reason to feel relatively secure because in his sort of ruling affirming that Texas can move forward with the map, Justice Alito noted California's done the same thing for partisan reasons. And so it seems, I'm not a lawyer, but it seems likely to me that the court, given that they let Texas's move forward, would let California's as well.
Well, we shall find out. Now, of course, the biggest element in all of this redrawing of maps are voters.
Yeah.
How are voters taking this?
I think when you saw the redistricting push happen in Texas, there was sort of massive backlash at the few hearings that they had. Obviously, you had the state house Democrats leave to deny a quorum for a few weeks, delaying the eventual passage of the map. I mean, this is now an issue, right, that people are talking about all around the country. Is it as big as the economy and affordability, issues like that? No. But, I do think voters are very much paying attention. This is not something that was sleepy. I mean, this has been, I think, a huge sort of national discussion.
Do you think it has any possibility of affecting outcomes in any of these races?
I mean, I think more likely it would be the sort of equal and opposite reaction, right, from these Democratic states in order to gain seats that sort of affects the outcomes. A, or B, efforts like in Missouri from voters to recall the map through the petition process. I think that's sort of where you'll see the outcome in terms of what lines are we actually using come next November.
And because tis the season, and we look ahead to 2026, and the midterm elections, big races coming up, and not to mention the tens of thousands of local officials who are going to be on the ballot as well. What are some of the things that you are going to be watching closely, either in your Texas bailiwick or on the Hill? What's got your attention?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a crazy election season in Texas. Obviously, there's competitive primaries for Senate in both parties, which is going to be very exciting. Republican side, you've got incumbent Senator John Cornyn. You've got a challenge from his right, from a statewide elected official, which is pretty rare, right? Attorney General Ken Paxton. And then a member of Congress, Wesley Hunt, getting in there as well, making noise. And then, as we mentioned, on the Democratic side, you've got Jasmine Crockett, State Rep James Talarico. So those are going to be really interesting, I think, in both races in Texas to see where the party's base is at. What kind of candidate are they looking for? I think in both parties, I think you see this sort of notion for someone who's going to fight the other party and a sort of excitement about that. And so we'll see where that takes voters. And then as well in Texas, there's open primaries. So it'll be interesting to see with competitive primaries on both sides, which one sort of independent leaning voters end up voting in. And then around the country, I think, there's still several issues for Congress to potentially resolve or not between now and the end of 2026. The Affordable Care Act, right, and the expiring tax credits that people apply to their premiums being a big one. I think it's going to be interesting to see what issues end up shaping the midterms. I think the economy and affordability are top of mind for people, but I'll be curious if some more niche issues like AI regulation or the lack of end up working their way into campaign ads or things like that, because for more local races like Virginia governor, which I'm sure, right, and New Jersey governor, data centers became this huge issue. So I'm kind of curious to see if on the federal level you get candidates talking about that as well.
Well, and then one of the other things that I think is worth talking about, what's the mood right now on the Hill? Are people upbeat, downbeat? Because you hear the stories and see the headlines
Yeah,
that there could be a lot more retirements coming, that there's a
I
lot of
think
people that are fed up, ready to go.
I think it's a little lethargic.
Mm.
I think Congress has sort of never been, at least in my career, more powerless, and that's by their own choice, right? I mean, President Trump has sort of seized authority on tariffs, these Venezuelan boat strikes, for example. There are all sorts of issues where Congress could assert themselves and has chosen not to. And I think that understandably leaves members frustrated at leadership. And I think you've seen a lot of that spill over recently with some women in the Republican conference in the House, frustrated that bills don't come to the floor. You've seen really a historic use of discharge petitions, which allows members, right, to circumvent leadership and get something onto the floor. That's how they passed the bill on the Epstein files. I think there's been a lot of reports that there are more retirements to come. So already in Texas, of the 38 members, 9, I believe if I have my math right, are leaving. 6 Republicans, 3 Democrats. Some because of redistricting, some to run for higher office, some just because they want to retire. And I think what's interesting about some of the retirements, you have people like Congressman Luttrell, who comes from the Houston area. Congressman Nell's also from the Houston area. These are Republicans who have only served 2-3 terms. They're in their 50s, that's a spring chicken in Congress.
Right.
And yet they're done. And so I think it's going to be interesting to see not just how many retirements are, but which members end up leaving. I think it's not just the people who say, all right, job well done, it's been a long career. I think it's the people who just don't want to be here anymore.
Yes, fascinating as always. And Gabby, I really appreciate you taking the time. I know you're busy. Even at this time, there's still don't people go on vacation? I mean, it's still hopping. That's the impression that I have. But Gabby Birenbaum with the Texas Tribune, thank you for being on the ballot. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
And to everybody else, of course, you can catch this episode wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. And trust me, I am not that terrifying on YouTube, I've been told. But until the next time, of course, in the next episode, I'm Norm Leahy, and I will see you in the digital pages of Ballotpedia. Take care.